Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today. Hope you're all doing absolutely excellent. Today, we're gathering around to talk about The Outer Worlds 2. I went hands-on with this bad boy nice and early, got to play the prologue stretch of the game, which went for a little bit over an hour. Did that twice over to see if I can make different choices and how that would play out. More on that in a bit. But going into this, you know, I was kind of in that middle area with The Outer Worlds 2, like excited for it, but almost cautiously so, which is not usually like me with Obsidian RPGs, but I felt like after Avowed, I had to just temper myself a little bit, but this also looked like the big one for Obsidian in a lot of ways. Like they were swinging hard with this compared to the likes of Avowed or Pentiment or Grounded. This is where a lot of the resources went. And I feel you can immediately feel that with this game and how it's presented, and I'll break that down. The TLDR is this. I've done previews for probably a decade now, and I have to say this was one of the safest I've seen. Nothing necessarily alarmed me outside of a little bit of player choice dialogue, but given the breadth of The Outer Worlds 2 and what Obsidian's talking about, I saw very little of that in my preview. This was a 1-hour slice of the game's prologue. Meanwhile, when I think back to my first preview of The Outer Worlds 1, I got my hands on a lot more. I got to see things like leveling up. I got to see things like exploration. I got to see how my choices played out. This felt like a far less confident and more safe showing of the game. I don't know what RPG benefits from seeing an hour of the introduction of the game. It doesn't mean it's bad, but it also doesn't mean I can safely say what's here will be good, which should be objective number one of any preview. Show what makes the game work, what makes the game tick, what makes the game exciting. I got to experience gunplay and stealth and extremely minor choice and consequence that, if explored on a larger scale, could be cool. But after this preview, I firmly remain in the place where Outer Worlds 2, I'm hoping for the best. I'm seeing some things I like, barring some of the player choice dialogue, but I'm not really able to make heads or tails of it in a definitive way until the final release. And I feel like they need to swing harder if they do another preview on this game. I have more thoughts I'll share in a little bit, but if you're new here, consider subscribing. And before we begin, a quick word from today's sponsor. Are you tired of your same old boring browser? I know I am, and that's why I'm here to tell you about Opera GX. Look, I found myself in a fantasy mood, a final fantasy mood. Your boy's been playing a lot of Final Fantasy lately, and so I go over to Opera GX, who has a wonderful mod shop here, and it's here that you can get all sorts of fantasy related mods, but for me, Final Fantasy, speaking my language, so here I am popping in that Final Fantasy theme, and it even has a little menu select sound effect for it, which I absolutely adore. So it completely customizes your browser however you want it to be. Now, let's say you're watching a little Mr. Matty and you're like, hey, I need to tab off this business. I got to go look up the greatest games coming out this year. You can do that very easily with Opera GX. Just ping out that video and then go ahead and search to your heart's desire. It's a beautiful thing. It's one of my most used features with this browser. And look, I do make my living this way, but also this one's on the house. They do have a built-in ad blocker if you want to check that out. And if you're coming over from another browser, don't worry. They have a great import tool that can get you set up really quickly. I found that super useful as well. So what are you waiting for? The best browser in the business is waiting for you in the link in the description down below. Give it a try, and shout out to Opera GX for sponsoring today's video. All right, so we played the prologue section of the game. Shout out to Xbox for the hookup. What do we see here? First thing we see is the character creator. Now, visually speaking, I think it's a little bit more important this time around because we can go in third person in The Outer Worlds 2. And I say that because it reminded me a lot of Avowed, where I really didn't like my appearance either way. Woman, you're better looking and cooler looking, so I ended up playing as one for my first rodeo in The Outer Worlds 2. But yeah, I'm a little bit let down by this character creator and how characters are appearing, especially because I was excited about the third person mode, and now it's like I'm going to be rushing to the first helmet and piece of armor that I can slap on my character. Men, I'm sorry. If you're like me, I don't know. I don't think I have that unique of a haircut or a hair color. You tell me if I'm wrong down below. I know like the whole jersey anime shirt combo, maybe that's something that's tough to find in an RPG. Fair enough. But look, like when it comes to the character creator for men, yo, we're not looking hot out there. I don't know, man. Like I just did not like it unless I was like a typical looking dude bro or something. Like I was not cooking with the male character creator. So maybe it's me because I had to go into like more female hair options, which is not how I feel like I'm rocking it. But I don't know. I did not like how guys looked in the character creator. Unless you had shorter hair, then I think you're doing fine. What I care more about in this character creator are my RPG elements. And that's where we get into backgrounds, traits, skills. A lot of these were shared between Avowed and The Outer Worlds 2. One of the biggest differences I could at least tell early on is that my background mattered way more in the prologue of this game. And I hope that carries across the entirety of the experience, because in Avowed, there was a lot of flavor dialogue, as I'll probably mention multiple times this video. And that fell really into the background of your character. And I get it, it was a multiplayer game gone single player. But here in The Outer Worlds 2, I was very happy to see my background felt like it opened up some unique options, some unique ways to solve problems. The traits, I'm a little bit in the middle on. You kind of have your positive and negative traits, a lot like Fallout New Vegas, where if you go in on some traits, you're going to take some negatives to offset it. Some I thought were just way better than others in the positive section of the traits, like additional skills that you could specialize in where you normally have 2, but you could specialize in 3, versus like sprinting into people to knock them over, or increased sprint speed and crouch speed. Like there were some that were so obviously way better, and I hope this list does stretch out a little bit longer, because I think there just needs to be more traits here to balance out what I think are very obvious choices. Anyway, I picked a little bit of a mixture of like the crouch speed, the sprint speed, and of course the third specialization. And I think to offset it, I took 15% less health. I'm like, easy choice. Then you get into the skills. If you've played The Outer Worlds 1, you'll know they had them as like families of skills, and they would all level up together. And then eventually, once you surpassed 50 and you hit that threshold, you'd be able to elevate them individually. This is a situation to me already, I can say, where less is more. You have things like medical, sneak, engineering, speech, and these are all utilized in individual pockets of the games that are reflected in gameplay way more than they really ever were in The Outer Worlds 1. And I think that will be a huge improvement, again, if the skill checking I saw was anything to go by in the prologue. We'll see how it goes across the full game. Not trying to sound too defensive here. We'll see. But I was encouraged by how the skills were applied. So I felt like character creation and actually who I was going to be mattered more than just flavor text and, you know, hey, I'm the ex-convict for like 5 minutes and it just sounds cool, but it doesn't actually change anything. That's what I expect from big budget RPGs. Have these things matter. If you're indie, you get the pass. So you start off the game as a commander aboard a ship on behalf of the Earth Directorate. And the game is already still funny in the way I love it, but it does appear to take itself a little bit more seriously, which I imagine a lot of you were looking for based on comments I read. So an example of this is a Protectorate guard having a conversation with another one of the grunts in the area, and they were talking about turning in their family because they insinuated that they didn't have an important job. Another example that I can't spoil just involves that I talked to a character and blew them off early. Something pretty bad happened to them later, and they were kind of laying there like, oh, if only you were nice to me earlier, then this would have happened. And it was both funny, but also like, damn, I did this to myself. And I knew it played out differently because the first time I was nice to this individual. And so I like that it kind of changed based on how I treated them. And the delivery of it was a good type of humor that I personally enjoy. But some of this I think is going to miss and kind of fall in the camp of what I now call meme-worthy writing. And by that I mean Avowed. And this is not with how characters talk, to be specific, at least from what I've seen, because the characters in The Outer Worlds talk like how they do in the first game, which I like. They're very human, but also corporate. And I find that to be endlessly hilarious. The player dialogue, though, especially in Avowed, I had a lot of issues with. Like, just anything my character said, I'm like, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I didn't get the feeling as frequently in The Outer Worlds 2, but there was a moment I was able to, it said twirl your pistol and tell a guard that I happened because some of a nasty business that went down earlier. Yeah, I saw that and went, oh no. It's like, that's just not, that's right. I call it writing that sounds good in your head. Like you write it down, you're like, yeah, that's funny. But when you say it out, you're like, yeah, like, you know, we need to act these things out a little bit more. So the other characters that I spoke to were written like Outer Worlds characters. That was good. That got the thumbs up for me. Player selection dialogue, a little bit iffy on though. Overall, the presentation of the game is far more cinematic. Like there are cutscenes with multiple characters talking and you can interact with them, which I know isn't really pushing things super far, but for an Obsidian game, this is kind of new for us. It's also just having full-on produced cutscenes in the middle of these story segments. There's a sense of scale within the levels. It already feels way bigger than the original, even if I didn't get to see all of the exploration, just the skyboxes, the environments, they just feel way, way bigger. And it's much more colorful, which I think The Outer Worlds already had a strong sense of color. The Series X visuals appeared to me a little fuzzy. might be the best word. I thought they could have looked sharper, so to me, I felt tempted to play this on PC when the full game comes out. If there's anything else I feel was kind of getting cheaped out on, it's the stealth takedown animation. Like, look, if I'm Xbox, I'm putting out a mandate across all my studios that just after Redfall, you cannot have cheap, crappy stealth takedown animations, like just poking people in the ass and having them literally die on the spot. Like, you can only get so far away with the comedy of it all before I'm like, this just looks like way too much of a corner cut. And I'm not saying I need Dishonored, like I'm putting the dude in a chokehold and like literally dragging him around. There's full body interaction, but like something that just doesn't involve a little poke and you're dead. You know, something like a stealth takedown animation would go a long way, especially because with the level design I saw and how you could actually use stealth in the Outer Worlds 2, and it might actually be worthwhile, I feel like this was a resource worth investing in. But let's get to the real meat and potatoes of the experience, what we're here for with an Obsidian RPG, and that is role-playing, skill checking. Now, there was a lot that I could skill check, and I mean that in a good way because a lot of it was framed with gameplay consequences. The problem, again, with the window of the demo, and I think I can already predict it now, a lot of people are gonna be like, I was skill checking everything, it was friggin' awesome. The problem is that a lot of people look at skill checks and they're like, I can do it, they passed. And it's like, no, it's about, you can do it, what happens after? I got to skill check things, but I didn't get to see what happened after. Not just in character reactions, but even within the levels. For example, I found a robot that if I had a high enough engineering to mess around with, I could augment it to fight with me. There was the ability to get a key card from a terminal, but my hacking skill wasn't high enough, so I couldn't get that. That would have gotten me through a doorway a little bit easier. I could have used the media port on a communications device. I'm not sure what that would have led to, but one good example of it being a bit more tangible was I got a bit of lore from a chalkboard that I could interact with, and the only reason I could understand what was on the chalkboard was because I chose the professor as my background. It's important to note that a lot of these initial skill checks seem to be targeting gameplay reactions and not just flavor text, which many RPGs, including Obsidian's most recent, were very guilty of. So it looks like, again, can't say for sure, but it looks like we're setting up a situation where how I build my character matters. There were some routes throughout the level I couldn't go through because my lockpicking wasn't high enough. That was a big one. I was like, dang, I should have invested in lockpicking because I felt like every door I wanted to get into was locked in this game. And that would have been immensely helpful in my exploration. But I loved that the game told me no oftentimes. And one thing Obsidian's mentioned before is embracing missed content. And again, with Avowed, I didn't feel that as much as I kind of felt it with the Outer Worlds 2. There comes a point where you can literally go left or right. There's just two paths. One is the gun blazing path. The other is the stealth path. And I got to see both of those through on two different playthroughs. And I got to say, I am surprised that when I went through the entirety of the prologue, you don't see the opposite side of that facility depending on which way you go through. If you take the stealth route, it's not like most games where, okay, eventually we're going to feed you through and we're going to put you in the part where the gun's blazing section. It's like, no, you just completely miss that part and what's over there. And I love that. That's what's been missing from many RPGs, but including Obsidian RPGs. I don't want to see everything. That's what makes the finale of these games so brilliant is I'm like, oh, that was amazing. And I get to play this again and see it through a different light. Like, that is what makes these games tick. And I feel like I'm seeing some signs in the skill checking and in the choices of how the gameplay plays out that I might be able to get that here. As for dialogue choice, there was a lot of X will remember that. I mean, a lot. And I saw it in some ways play out. For example, that one time a guy was like, if only you were nice to me earlier. But in the terms of the finale of the prologue, I didn't see like dramatically different cutscenes or dramatically different endings depending on what I did beforehand. This goes back to what I said, kind of a safe prologue, kind of want to see like the breadth of the options that the game is offering and to be a little more firm on like they're heading in a right direction and this does feel good or not. So while the verdict is out on the choices, I can talk a bit more about the gameplay and what I feel a little bit stronger on, which is that the Outer Worlds 1's combat was all right. Like, it was serviceable. Like, it was a game where you could shoot, you could loot, and that was fine for what it was trying to be. I think some people are a little bit harsh on it, and I never really agreed with it because a lot of the game is about talking to people and finding unique solutions through your obstacles. This game, though, because of the breadth of the level design and the different paths you can take and the improved gunplay, the expectation should be better AI, for example, that actually fights you. When I played this on normal and I was doing stealth, There was a moment where like an enemy looked straight at me and barely reacted. Granted, we're a couple months away, but still, it was a little bit of an uh-oh moment. So playing it on normal, I went, this does feel a little bit like old gamey Outer Worlds 1, where, yeah, I mean, the role-playing stuff can be cool, but I can kind of joke my way through the game. So on playthrough 2, I went to the hard difficulty, and I'm glad I did, because this feels like where the game should be played. Like, I actually had robots that would fly at me and flush me out of cover. I had enemies with melee weapons that were way more aggressive. They didn't feel super spongy in an unfair way. This incentivized stealth gameplay. This incentivized a little bit more intensity on me doing speech checks. Like, if you're listening to this and you're like, one way or another, I'm playing the Outer Worlds 2, then just take this away with you. Play the damn game on hard, because it felt way, way, way better that way. Like, immediately I locked in on a completely different level. And I'm usually one who, like, I just go with normal. I go with whatever the developer recommended difficulty is. This felt really, really good on hard, because there was a little bit of added intensity to everything I did. Like, going guns blazing, you can do this, but you know, it's going to be a little bit more hard because the enemies do hit a bit harder. I didn't see a control option for it, but I hope the game has like leaning, because that was something that got me shot a lot when I shouldn't have been shot. And that would have been a great feature to have if it's not there. This game is getting a lot of comparisons to Fallout, which makes sense, especially when you're adding a radio to your technological device that is very, very, very Fallout. Some other Fallout-isms that I noticed, though, because you know me, Fallout brain Matty, never shuts off. A lot of gore. When there are explosions, I mean, you know what I'm talking about in Fallout, where every limb's missing, like head's missing, arms missing, legs missing. It's just a torso and a waist with literally nothing else. I saw that level of gore and arms blowing off, and it wasn't anything like Fallout where you shoot someone in the head and their whole body explodes, at least not yet. Again, would have loved to see the perks and the leveling up and how that plays out and what gameplay buffs I get there. But as it stands now, lots of gore. Not sure if it's Fallout level though, but it seems like when it makes sense, like I shot an exploding barrel where a protectorate guard was there, and when it blew up, I mean, there were parts of him everywhere. I love that stuff. When you combine that with the slow-mo kill cam, I am getting a lot more Fallout vibes here. And I smiled when it happened. When I shot someone and it went like slow motion and their body just ragdoll and I heard the slow motion sound effects, I went, yeah, dude, that's Fallout. But ultimately, what sucks is that I can't sit here and go chest down and be like, yeah, they did it. There was reactivity, and I got to see the leveling up, and there were real gameplay ramifications to that, and I got to explore, and the areas were much bigger and more impressive. In a lot of ways, I have to call it how I see it. It feels like Obsidian and in turn Xbox were leaning on studio reputation to carry a lot of this preview. Like, oh, this is Obsidian proper. You see, there are skills that are popping up in dialogue, but I think actual RPG fans will be able to sniff this one out and be like, I got to see how all of this reacts. I could speculate all day why this preview was incredibly safe. I mean, it could be because Avowed was incredibly open. People got to play that for up to 6 hours. But the reality is that is just speculation. If I could be definitive on anything, it's just that the preview didn't move me really in a more positive direction. That's as someone who, as you've heard in my coverage before, was a little bit more hype on the game, even with the $80 price tag, because I like Obsidian RPGs. I just feel with the doubt around it being an $80 game at one point, and now the latest companion trailer being absolutely destroyed, I feel like the slice of the game you have to show to people like me has to be way, way more convincing. And it's not. So I'm not one to negatively speculate, but I do want to trust my gut here, which is saying that something feels off with the framing of this preview. And if it was just an honest mistake, I hope there's a second round that shows the game in a much stronger light. One that shows off its strengths and one that clearly makes it an RPG and not a stealth action shooter game. But still, this was an hour snippet. And when I played the first Outer Worlds for a preview, it was multiple hours long, and I got to walk away with a decent feel for it all. A lot of this feels a bit surface level, but the good news is I didn't see anything super concerning. But if the game's going to be big, then how could I in such a tight window? Get what I'm saying? So this should give you a gauge of where the Outer Worlds 2 is at. I think right now, no need to completely fear, but definitely wait out for those full reviews of people who have actually played the game through all the way to kind of know what the entirety of the Outer Worlds 2 is going to offer you in terms of what I think my audience is looking for, which is really strong reactivity, great writing, solid gunplay and gameplay scenarios, and kind of taking that level design that evolved from Avowed and bringing it over into this game where there was a lot of ways to approach environments. I want to see all of that. Other than that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.